Just wanted to give a quick introduction here to our guest. We're joined by the great Juan Luis Carrera. He is owner of Ravenhouse Management and former manager, sound engineer, touring musician, really the whole nine yards. Really excited to have you here, Juan, just to talk a little more in depth about what it means to build a sustainable career in the music industry and the role that music management can play in artist development and success. So you've had a long career here learning how these things work, and we're really excited to chat with you today, Juan.
Thank you. And I appreciate this opportunity. It's not my normal thing, so, coach me along the way.
Yeah, everybody, please be patient, be kind, and sit back and enjoy here. We're going to go ahead and get started, Juan. And my first question here is specifically about Ravenhouse Management, something you've been working with for a while and has been home to some, frankly, very big names in indie music as they've come up through the industry. So I wanted to just kick things off with the conversation by asking, what is Ravenhouse's philosophy when it comes to managing new talent? And how do you ensure that bands you work with feel supported and challenged to grow as artists?
That's a good question. I mean, the main philosophy is it's really about the artist comes first. That's why a lot of times you probably don't hear about me or the things that I do, because I kind of look at it as I helped build the ship and they put the wind in the sails. And really the architecture just comes from the dreams that they come up with. And just as far as trying to build a career, I think the simplest way we look at it really is trying to increase things 10%, but also reduce things 10%. And I just mean that in the sense of, like, sometimes we come in with too much baggage, and it's like, how can you make that baggage more profitable, and how can you get rid of some of it along the way? And I'm not going to call it garbage, because people have all kinds of amazing creative things going on, and my job is really to not get in their way and help them get out of their own way.
Interesting. So just out of curiosity, and you don't have to be any too specific, but what kind of baggage can some bands be bringing in when they're seeking management like Ravenhouse and trying to kind of take that next step in their careers that you've seen?
I think it's one of the easiest one is just like sort of a complicated process to, say, creating merchandise or touring with, excess amounts of people that are not needed. And it's just trying to take a broad perspective of all those things and sort of giving my 2 cents after doing this as long as I have. But I've been fortunate to make those mistakes along the way too. So it's just sharing that advice. And but if someone chooses to do those things, it's really their in the end, I'm working for them.
Sure. So yeah, you have to let the band kind of make their own mistakes sometimes too, I'd imagine, despite the fact you're there, watching them do it.
Yeah, but some of those mistakes are the great successes. Like there are things that I might have said no to that really opened my eyes to a new perspective. And that's why you kind of have to try.
And I guess I'll ask, just because in your career, you transitioned from running a small indie label called Slow Dime out of Washington, D.C., and started managing bands kind of from there, to my understanding. So I'm wondering, what drew you to the management side as the next step in your career in the music industry after, managing a label and playing in bands yourself? What drew you towards that management?
I think it was, there was a big gap in there too, that I was on tour quite a bit, helping bands, whether it was doing sound is where it started from, and then tour managing. And it was just seeing, I guess, people making mistakes or being taken advantage of. And all I ever wanted to do was help people. And having had the experience of putting records out recording records, helping them get distributed. It was just it was really the next step. It kind of, the roadmap was decided before I joined it. And I was fortunate enough to have lots and lots of people help me along the way, and just loads of mentors that I cannot thank enough.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So like building that network around you really helps you look to other people who may have experienced similar things that you're now going through for the first time as you take a transition, to a different step of your career like that. And having those people to lean on really helps you make that transition more smoothly, I would imagine.
Yeah, oh yeah, it makes you trust your gut a lot more. And that's really the one thing that I strive for, is just like, what happens in that instinct moment? Is it like someone told me once, it either has to be a hell yes or a hell no, and you just got to really make a bold statement. The idling in between is not it's not making a decision, but that is a decision.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Even if we're like in transition, you still have to recognize that you're taking steps forward, and important to have those people around you to reinforce that. Cool. And I wanted to ask something more specifically, just from a management perspective, because a lot of bands, especially artists that work with Sofar right now, are still operating independently, are still kind of trying to take this DIY approach to managing themselves or managing their own independent label, different things that, you've come up and discovered yourself, through your time growing your career in the industry. So I wanted to ask, is there inevitably a time where an artist is absolutely going to need management, or is there a more DIY approach possible in the long term for a musician's career?
There's a fork in the road with that question, and it just matters about what's taking up the artist's time and them having the ability to create. And the time that you need a manager, for me, is when the business side of it, or the bedrock, is consuming your creative mind. And you need to separate that to keep being creative. Because at a certain point, if you're just trying to write a song and you're, I don't know, thinking about money or when your next Instagram post is going to be, you're not really fully engaged in writing a song. But the other side of it too is the DIY approach keeps the person very, very connected to what they're doing. And I'm always trying to bridge that gap between those two things. So sometimes it might be like, why are you asking me this question? Or can't you just do this without asking me? But it's really important to keep the artist involved and engaged the entire time, because it's really their vision. And it might sound like I'm adding an extra step, but it's just reassurance the whole time.
And just that communication, being able to communicate why it might be important to be adding an extra step like that from a management perspective, it still allows you to find that balance where they can be creative, but you're still propelling them forward and helping them develop.
Yeah, because sometimes timing is a lot of these things, like laying out a roadmap, just like where are you trying to go and how do you want to accomplish it? Like one of the things that I sometimes ask artists to do before they ever write a record or make a record is to actually write a review of what they think that record is going to be and what a person in the press is, and then put it in an envelope. Now go make that record, and then open that envelope, and if you've achieved that, then you've achieved your goal. And and that's what we're really trying to do, and have that communication. And if I can help propel them and be their support, that's what I'm there for. Call me whenever you need to, just bounce ideas off of me. Just I'll be the little person on your shoulder listening to what you have to say. But the one thing I'm not going to do just is I'm not going to get in the way of their creativeness. Just, I can't, it's hard for me at times, but I've learned to be very, very patient and listen, because sometimes people are searching for something that they haven't quite found, and I don't want to steer them in the wrong direction, because it might just be around the corner, and that's really
Hmm.
important for them.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think a lot of that philosophy, that perspective has to come from somebody who's actually experienced it to an extent too. You yourself have played in many bands, most famously, and I was listening to your all's record, The Warmers, playing bass in The Warmers, and really enjoyed that record a lot and wanted to ask, from being a musician yourself and creating music, how does that experience writing, playing, and performing music help inform how you find and develop an artist you're interested in working with? How has that kind of guided your path, having that experience as a musician, going through those motions yourself?
That one's tough, because I, I really put down my musical instrument, which was the bass guitar, in 1997, and I couldn't really tell you that I could play to save myself right now. But when I did that, I I really tried to focus on listening to what these artists were doing. Meaning, it might be the lyrics, it might be um, the the hook in the song. But I just started backing farther and farther away and tried to be as objective as I could, because I was a sound engineer, I was a recording engineer, I was a musician, and I didn't want to necessarily pay attention to their musicianship as much as it was like, is this a cool song? Like, is this have like some potential? Like, um, where is it going? And I tend to gravitate to the stranger songs on a record than the ones that are the most obvious.
Hmm.
But the one thing I will say that I've tried to do the most is I try to I watch a lot of new bands. I go to shows, I see things, but I don't really try to engage as a manager in with a band unless I fully like it. And then the other perspective I have, or tick in the box, is that I really want people to be a musician for at least 10 years. Because
Hmm.
the I don't want to say it's a hobby before that, but I think it's important for people to learn their path and to know like what it's like to book a show, what it's like to
Hmm.
talk to a lawyer, um, what it's like to talk to a record label, what it's like to talk to a promoter, because you can't have your hand held the whole time. And the people that I tend to find that have done that and been pretty self-sufficient, it really makes the work with me a lot smoother.
Hmm. That actually brings me to a question that one of our attendees had submitted here. I kind of don't want to wait until the end and work it in here because it seems pretty relevant. Tim had asked, from your point of view, what is the net present value of most new artists within their first year? You talk about a lot about how musicians can look at developing their craft as more of a hobby over the first, sometimes decade, like you said. But is there a break-even calculation that you use before knowing whether a band warrants additional resources or management that will help it kind of launch to another level? Do you have to see those numbers or that data before you can recognize, like, yes, I can invest my time or resources into this band?
Um, the Yes, there is a number that, at least for myself, and but you have to put a lot of like thought into it as well, and it's that going with your gut. But for Ravenhouse, the magic number is being able to play shows and 300 people be at every city,
Mhm.
because essentially that means that and I'll use a 4-piece band, can sustain themselves and live comfortably, and them being a musician being their full-time job.
Mm-hmm. So being able to hit that like 300 mark is kind of like the brink of sustainability for a band on paper anyway.
Yeah, there's plenty of people that are doing it with less attendance because there's, they could be making more money off of record sales, or they're publishing, or, they're getting syncs, or somehow there's merchandise. The gamut's there, but that seems to be the magic number for when I look back at history for me that I've seen.
Right. And this might be relative to that, this might, honestly, that might be the answer to this question. But in what ways do you aim to set your acts up so that they're sustainable in terms of finding success in the music industry? Is it just getting to the point where maybe before you even work with them, they have to be showing potential towards that 300 number? Or, what other lessons have you learned about like the importance of bands thinking sustainably like that and encouraging them to get to that point? I don't know if you've worked to get bands to that 300 number, if you typically start with bands who have reached that number.
No, we've worked to get bands to that number, and I think there's 4 elements that I'm always looking at. In one is the composition, and it's like whether you're getting publishing money. The second would be touring or live performances. The third would be the recording of that composition. So it's like if it's coming out on streaming. And then the fourth is merchandise. And if you can keep all 4 of those revenue streams, because I try to look at them isolated, flowing all the time, you're able to sustain yourself in the up years, aka putting out a record and touring behind it, and then the down years when you're not. One thing that I really believe is that a band is meant to play, or a performer is meant to play live, and there are no years that you do not tour or not play shows. It's really what the craft was meant to be. That's where I come from. I don't manage any artists that just make music and don't play live shows.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Cool. So jumping off a little bit more into like specifically the music management, wanted to ask you a few questions there. So we, again, have been talking a lot about this 300 number and seeing artists that can break out from even that and really start moving toward some mainstream success. So and you've worked with a lot of bands that I think, have really turned a corner working with Ravenhouse Management and starting to find that mainstream success. So wanted to ask a little bit, about your experience managing a band who's at that breaking point where they start to find more mainstream success on tour, whether it's nationally or internationally. And in those kind of situations, when a band is turning that corner, what kind of lessons have you taken away from managing bands in that position? And what can artists take away from that?
I think the first lesson I've learned is to control the pace, because it can go, if everything's going well, it can go really fast and you're not prepared for it. And that meaning just too much too fast. And I've seen people racing to kind of keep up, and the live performance interviews, things of that nature, suffer because the people are tired. And I've had situations where bands would be in a van, for example, and they're trying to race to the next town to do radio that tends to happen early in the morning. And you realize this is the time you move to a bus. It sounds like a luxurious thing, but it's really about just maintaining and keeping up the pace. But letting them have a chance to rest and be sane the next day.
Hmm.
I think it's really important to run your own race and not look at other people and feel comfortable with what you're trying to do yourself. And I know a lot of the people we're speaking to are playing Sofar shows, and it seems like it might be very far in the distance, but it's just getting all those small things prepared, um, and and having a goal and just taking those steps a little bit. It comes back to me, it's about 10% plus and 10% minus. How can
Hmm.
you build 10% every year? That's all I'm trying to push for. Sometimes it's larger, sometimes it's 8%, it's 9%, but just striving, and at least you're trying.
Sure. Yeah. And I feel like having that margin really does help you visualize what that 10% consists of. Even independent acts that might not have management or, might be touring in an old beat down van, like maybe that 10% is getting the van fixed and making sure that you can take your next national tour and build your fan base even more, or putting out that new record and seeing what happens, and from there, I feel like that advice around pace is so important because it can start going off the rails and moving very quickly before you know it in a lot of cases. Um, in terms of managing bands that go from local or national tours to, touring internationally, we have a lot of independent artists that work with us, and so far being in cities all over the world gives the opportunity for artists to fill in dates on tour to play so far shows where they normally might not be able to draw a fan base or really find a venue that might be a good fit for them, but they're still going on international tours at times, and we're seeing that facilitated. So I'm wondering, what are some of the less obvious differences between managing a local or national tour as opposed to managing bands that are going internationally that we should watch out for, aside from, the obvious currency changes and time zones and all of that good stuff? Is there anything that stands out?
Mainly taxes. Is
Hmm.
that when you play in foreign countries, you might get an offer that is for X amount of dollars, but what's not stipulated inside of that is there's going to be taxes taken from that money before it comes to yourself, and it's just important to know that. And then the second is, as you're growing as a band, is to actually have insurance on all your equipment,
Hmm.
because you never know when something is going to happen, whether it's someone breaks into your vehicle and steals a computer that could be your lifeline or your credit cards, or
Hmm.
um, I've seen the gamut of different things. It's just having um, being prepared. Those are the two things that I've seen people forget about quite a bit.
Hmm. And would that kind of bleed into the idea of common mistakes that up and coming artists might make? Have you seen, any artists that are really starting to catch a break and releasing one of their first albums with acclaim? They might be moving pretty quickly, and I feel like mistakes can definitely be made in that time frame. So I'm wondering how some artists can prepare themselves for those kind of pitfalls. Most commonly, working with management for the first time, what are some of the kind of mistakes that artists tend to make when they're first starting to build a team around them?
I think if I understand the question correctly, it's just trying to push to go being bigger than you really are and spending more money than you're really making.
Hmm.
Because the one thing that I'm kind of looking at is the bottom line all the time. It's my job. Like I want I want there not to be more than 50% of expenses going out, meaning like travel, hotels, because
Hmm.
as you get more or as you get to be a larger and larger band, it's not staying at people's houses. It's staying at hotels, and it's not staying in one hotel. It's every person needs their own hotel room. And it's just looking out for those numbers, but keeping, having someone being watchful of that is a very important threshold. And even just spending too much on a video, because nowadays it's how much is being consumed by a video. But everybody needs to know where their audience is too. That's really, because it comes down to it. Videos playing on late night TV, these are all like goals that people want to achieve, but you have to know, like, is it going to account for selling more records? Is it going to account for more people coming on tour? And these are the common questions and conversations that I have with each artist on a record to record cycle.
That's interesting, because I feel like, earlier in the conversation, we talked a lot about creativity and not standing in the way of an artist's ability to be creative. And management plays such a huge role in asking those questions and thinking about, the business side of it. But as independent artists who are maybe learning to manage and book shows for the first time, or go on a tour for the first time, release a record or an EP, I feel like that's something that does get a little lost in the shuffle for really creative types who might not have necessarily put themselves in like the business shoes that they need to wear in order to take these next steps in their career. And that's where management might actually really come in handy.
Yes, and it could be found with a business manager as well. There's a couple steps along the way. I tend to find people are really creative, and that's what I enjoy. When I get an opportunity to talk to someone that's in a band that's starting off, I learn a lesson every single time. Like something I would have never thought of, and I have to sock it away in my memory and write it down, because it might become useful later on, because there's people that are a lot savvier than I am.
But still, yeah, like being able to, like, again, what you mentioned, having that network of people around you that you're able to pool those resources from and understand, well, I watched this person go through this. I watched this person who had shared this knowledge or insight with me. So my approach to it is going to be different, taking these things into account. That's always crucial. So what advice would you have to younger managers, more specifically, or people that are maybe just starting to build a roster of acts, or focusing on one specific group to manage? What does it look like from that management perspective, not necessarily coming from an artist point of view, but starting out as a manager and trying to make something of yourself in the industry that way?
I would stay focused on keeping your clientele, your roster small, and what I say is you want to go deep and not wide, meaning you really want to dive in with them. And I think it's important for young managers to go on the road with bands and see what their day-to-day life is. Just because it's one thing to talk to them on the phone, but it's another to be there when the van breaks down or they, lose some piece of equipment, just to see what it is, because that experience it helps focus the attention for when the band is on tour. You can sympathize, but you can also try to prevent those problems going forward.
And is there anything that stands out for you as some things that managers can be mistakenly asked to do by artists where it might not actually be their job? Are there any things that commonly, get suggested for managers to take care of, but at the end of the day, that actually isn't a real expectation of a manager?
It's never happened to me, but I've known of a manager that was taking care of an artist's dog. And,
really?
Yeah. It's, I mean, like I said, we all do different things. But I mean, when it comes down to it, if someone needs their laundry done because they don't have enough time, I'm going to go do it if I have the time. Because it comes back to these people are performing. They're trying to create whatever I can do to make that space available for them. And I have been asked at times to back off even because they were just like, I need to be able to do some of these things for myself because that is their time to be creative. And you have to just pay attention and listen and observe.
I have a specific question too around working with bands that may have broken up at a later time or just gotten older, started having families of their own. Have you managed bands that as they've worked their way through the music industry and played for maybe years on end, where their lives start evolving and changing and things get maybe more difficult to keep the band together or to keep them focused on creativity? What's that like, watching that kind of transition in a band that you may have worked with for a long time that is just changing in their normal day-to-day lives?
Yeah, well, there's some beauty in that because knowing these people as long as you have and to see them start families of their own and grow in different ways is, well, it's amazing on its own, but it also brings a different wealth of experiences to the creative process that might be difficult because people move away. But same is I strive to try to create that time for them to, whether they want to get together and play music or not. It's important just to mark that time on a calendar and say, this is where we talked about, maybe it's June 1st to June 7th. You're all going to meet in X town and you're going to play music or hang out or just do some fun activities because it takes a little bit more. It's not every day not having responsibilities and just going to the practice space and playing music until you find these songs inside of yourselves. Now it takes a little bit more organization.
Yeah, and as other things get in the way too, it takes even more organization in order to make sure that all of that is balanced, right?
Yeah. Well, I try to put soft bumpers on their worlds because life changes, whether it's a birth or someone losing somebody or just any sort of things. And it comes back to that creating space and leaving room for there to be some time for things to grow. And there's nothing wrong with a little bit of time.
Yeah, I mean, this has been great. And I have a few other questions here on my end, but we've got so many audience questions coming in that I'm actually going to start transitioning over. Just to give credit where credit is due, that last question, want to shout out to Rupert in the audience who submitted that. Great question, Rupert. And going to start diving into a few of these questions that we've been getting submitted. Adam here is a question that I think relates a little bit more to what we were talking about around that 300 mark, and kind of moving past that milestone. But Adam asks us here, and thanks for the question, Adam. For an independent artist, at what point do you feel it's best to start looking for a team, i.e. a booking agent, a manager, a publicist? And what is the first team member that should be added? How's the best way to go about adding that first team member from your point of view?
I would say it's a toss-up between, to me, a lawyer and a booking agent, really being the first people to the team. And I just say that because, well, Sofar offers a great platform to be able to tour the world, but eventually you want to go farther than what Sofar offers. And that person has a lot of connections, just the same way as a lawyer does. A lawyer is a great person just because they do have a lot of booking agent friends, they're friends with labels, they're friends with publicists. They're sitting in an office dealing with contracts a lot, but they also get to see where the music's going. They know the business as a future. And so sadly, I have to say either one of those, but the best way to go about getting those is submitting your music to those two individuals, just reaching out. I know it sounds difficult, and we've all done it. I do it every day, and you might not get a response, but just sort of let that person know something new. Like if the lawyers in New York just say, hey, we're coming to play a show. Maybe you want to come. I'll put your name on the door. This is what time. Give them all the information. Whether they come or not, don't worry. Don't follow up and ask if they came or they liked it. Just put yourself out there. And the same goes for a booking agent. Wherever they might be. Maybe they have someone else on their team, or try to see if you can become friends with bands that they book that you like as well. And maybe you reach out to those bands and you somehow get picked to support when they come through your town. And then they tell the booking agent about you. There's the internet's made it a lot easier.
Sure. But there's still those organic opportunities that I feel like they're glamorized to a certain extent. The bands that are playing in the back of a bar with 4 people and the Epic Records manager just happens to walk into this dive bar and see them play and then talks to them after the fact. You know, in our personally, like from a musician's point of view, that's a fantasy. That's something that, you know, we do fantasize about, going to every show, and with every opportunity, you hope that it will lead to the next opportunity. But you said something there that really resonated with me, in that, you know, the creative process should be the number one, first and foremost focus for these artists. They should be making music that they're proud of and that they're interested in and that, you know, they feel is good. And then from there, while yes, there is a bit of luck involved, I think that being able to take these, I don't want to call them risks, but those next essential steps to reach out and try to set up those opportunities for yourself is important. And it could just be as simple as an email and putting a name down at the door sometimes.
Yeah. There's no downside to it that I can
Right.
see.
Yeah, you got nothing to lose, everything to gain. And that ties into a question that we got here from Patrick here. Thanks for the question, Patrick. He talks about being an artist that started releasing recordings, a few singles or an album or music video, and you've gotten a handful of gigs under your belt, but what are some ideas for next steps? I think it all relates to some of the things we're talking about here, but Patrick specifically touches on, you know, how do bands that are in that still beginning stage, but starting to gain more momentum, look to get some press, grow their listener base, or just get an audience outside of their local area. And this is assuming that there isn't a lot of online data or a few followers in every given city. So how do they start expanding there and, you know, getting the word out about the things that they're doing?
I think the inside of that question is starting local, like, and really building that momentum there, because I think the momentum will come as you continue. And it's these, what I went back to, maybe you're supporting a national act when they come through, and someone will naturally say, wow, this band drew X amount of people. I wouldn't have thought it. They were really great. Because bands do talk to their managers, to their booking agents, and everybody's going to say something. They're going to say if you're a good band or you're trying really hard and you're nice, they're going to pass that on. And I think really it's an open-ended question, but truly just kind of keep going at that. And then one aspect is to say 3 weekends of the month you play locally. That last 4th weekend, go somewhere new. Go and just try it. If 2 people show up, keep going, like, and just keep going at that. But keep that 3 weekends going, locally to sort of keep income coming in, and then just go and take a chance somewhere else. If you keep doing that, you'll eventually start to gain that momentum and spread it a little bit wider. So if you casted your net as 100 miles, like, just start tipping your toe or dipping your toe in the 200-mile away from your house, and just continue to make that circle bigger and bigger. I look at the US as 5 or 6 circles, and I'm just trying to keep bands inside of those to gravitate, because sure, you're popular in a lot of places, but where are you not popular? And if you're not popular, I'm not going to say go play 20 shows in this not popular circle. Like, just go and play 1 or 2, and then the next time play 1 or 2 different ones. And the more you continue to do it, you will grow. It's just, you have to be persistent, and most importantly, patient.
Right. That makes so much sense. And I think, a lot of this does tie back to things that you've been bringing up since the start of this conversation, which are great. Thinking about that 10% model that you were talking about, growing 10% every year, that can be looked at on the map too, where you're looking at these circles and trying to grow a circle by 10% every year. It might sound, even like a pretty tall order, depending on how big your circle is already. But if you're working with a tiny circle in a local scene, taking those extra time, and it could be really fun too, in a way, with a band that might have a new manager or might be first starting out, to explore where can we find that 1% this month to grow. Where can we target? And in that same time, tying back to building a network, it seems like just being able to target those venues or DIY communities or Sofar shows even to go and play, you're then growing your network to a certain extent, and you might find that next opportunity in a place where you might not have expected it, right?
Correct. And if I know I talk about the 10%, and you're definitely right, and it's just these small increments, because they can go a lot faster. But the most important part is that you're constantly trying, and within those places that you're going and you're striving, it comes to that growth comes from those people that are seeing you in the audience, the promoters that are talking about you. And I, sorry to say it again, but I don't see any downside.
Yeah. No need to be sorry. That definitely makes sense. People have to kind of take those risks. And this question here that we got from John kind of ties into that a little bit more too. So just to stay in the idea of growing your network and, reaching that minimum attendance cap of about 300 people, he asks, in order to reach that minimum attendance cap in each city for an emerging artist, how do you go about building that credibility and engagement in cities which you don't necessarily have a defined foothold in? We're trying to grow these circles and play in these areas where we're trying to find a foothold for the first time. But John here says that he's been told that in other cities, they need to be worth a certain number of tickets locally. And it's not often that they're able to bring artists over internationally to perform in places where they can't pull that amount of numbers, for example. So what do artists do in those situations where maybe they're being told, even though their goals align with, oh, I want to grow my circle here, I want to expand my network here, I've been told by this venue that I won't draw well enough, or I don't know, what direction to go into. Is there a solution there that you found?
The only one I can say is being persistent and finding an alternative space to play. That's the beauty of Sofar that I enjoy, is you offer an opportunity for people that could not play in certain towns, that there's not an whatever, the venue, it doesn't like them. And I think it's important to sort of keep an email list, like let people know that you're coming to town. It's don't necessarily rely on Facebook posts or Instagram posts. Like, I really think it's important to try to let people know. And if you can break up that list into the different towns and regions that you're going, from time to time when you're going there, just send an email out and say, we're coming. Maybe you offer someone that's been responsive to you free tickets, and then they bring 2 or 3 other people to the show. And growth it's inevitable if you keep going. It's not giving up is really important, because I don't know how many times I've heard that's not possible in my life. Well, I don't believe that things are impossible.
Right. Yeah. If there's a will, there's a way. Famous catchphrase. So we've got just a little more than 10 minutes left. Still plenty of questions coming in. Wanted to thank everybody for the questions we've got here from our attendees. We'll have time for a few more here, and then try to get through as many as we can. But there's a few questions coming in that are more specific to something that I think a lot of bands put a lot of weight behind, which is social media reach. And having an active online presence, which you mentioned earlier in the conversation, growing a network and appealing to a larger network of people, being online makes a difference. It does help having these tools at our disposal here. But Philip Scales, an artist that I'm actually I've met for coffee before. So Philip, nice to see you here. But he has a great question that he submitted. He says, your approach seems to be a bit more holistic, which I can agree. But social media can be time consuming and it's sometimes distracting. So as a manager in your position, how much weight do you give to social media for specifically newer acts?
It's real. You have to. But the one thing that I really try to buckle down on is you don't need to do Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram and Snapchat and TikTok. Pick whichever one that you feel the best with and really use that. And that comes from what I said before about going deep, and just really dive in. Use that as your platform. Your audience is going to know that you're genuine, and you're going to feel good about it. And that's the most important thing. Like, I don't need to see that someone's active on every format, because it comes back to that idea. Then I'm like, well, when was the last time you wrote a song? Because you seem to be spending all your time on the internet. Sometimes it's important to turn your phone off and play music. And then when you feel inspired, put that picture up on Instagram, or send that tweet about something fun that you just did, or ask your fans a question, or tell them something about yourself. But yes, it's in this day and age, it's really, really important.
But that's a really great point that I think, there's so many different outlets right now for independent musicians to market themselves, so to speak, through social media specifically, that your point really resonated with me, in that being able to focus on one specific area where you feel you have the most momentum or the most ability to engage with your current audience, which I think in tandem helps grow a wider audience on social media. When you see artists engaging with fans who, their friends can see that and become new fans, it seems to provide a chain reaction, but it's easy to get distracted on multiple different platforms, for sure.
Oh yeah, I mean, granted, yes, I'm an older person, and well, like nowadays, when you're a musician, you have to look good on Instagram. You gotta make funny videos on YouTube.
Learn all the new TikTok dances.
Yeah. Well, it's just and you still got to do press. There's just a lot more. There's a lot more distractions or things that keep you from doing what it is that at least I feel the artists that I manage want to do, which is get up on stage and play music. They want to make records so people listen. And these other elements take a little coaxing, but at the same time, that's where I'm trying to help provide the balance. Sometimes I have to say no to press. Sometimes you have to take a chance and say yes. but when you're young, you need to do a lot of it, and it's what really grows your audience. Like, there used to be a lot of blogs. There probably still are a lot of blogs, and there's local and small ones. Just say, do as many of those as you can in your hometown. Spread the word, because everybody's going to be looking and reading these things. And from time to time, I do it all the time. I'll be like, I've never heard of this band. Who are they? And the next thing I know, I'm just like, wow, what was I doing? Like, where did I miss that? This band Pomplamoose is definitely, over all the years, like, that's one of the bands that I found on YouTube. Didn't play shows for a long time, and I think they only went on one tour. And
Mhm.
it's an amazing, amazing band. And here nowadays, well, they invented the quarantine video as far as I'm concerned, because they were just making cool videos in a space that was just theirs, and just
Mhm.
making music over and over every day.
Right. Again, coming back to that creativity, getting creative and putting it out there and letting people discover it. I think there's a magic in that too.
Mm.
I can't count how many times I've been to a festival or seen bands come through town and disregarded them only to learn about the band and a few years later and realize the mistake I'd made not catching them at that small show where now tickets are way more expensive. I think we've all felt that. But wanted to talk a little more. There's a few questions coming in about something that I think we can all relate to right now, and it's this new normal kind of world that we're living in, especially from a musician standpoint. Can be confusing and tricky and scary in a lot of ways. And we have independent artists that are wondering. Specifically, this question here comes in from Ben. He asks, what about second revenue streams? Touring and live shows in this specific time are difficult, if not impossible. And in this kind of pandemic that we're living in right now, do you see a real world alternative in online shows or other second revenue streams that you've been discovering now that we can't tour and play live shows at the moment?
Well, I guess it brings me to sort of, I'll call it government relief right now.
Hmm.
And if if I was going to say, yes, streaming shows are working for some people, but they're not going to work for everybody. And when this is all over, streaming is going to fade back to what it was. And there's a lot of artists that were and do make their living off of streaming shows, and they'll continue to. But then the artists that play shows in rock clubs or house shows or any of that, they're going to go
Hmm.
back to that, and people are going to be really excited. But right now, I would stress that if you're an artist and you can qualify for any of these relief funds, to definitely do that, because that's what they're there for. Don't feel um, embarrassed or anything of that nature. It's really important, because this will be over and you'll get back to some form of normal.
Hmm.
I think earlier we said it's the new normal. Um, but as far as income, it's tough. That's why earlier I stressed on the idea of, I'm really trying to push for the four things. It's merchandise, it's touring, it's the composition of the song, being like the publishing side, and then the sale or stream of the song. It's now, maybe it's just a little bit, it's time to focus on, how do you keep your streaming numbers active? How do you tell people about your music? Because you can't be there to play a show. And just reminding them, making sure your entire playlist is on your website, is so make it easy, so that if someone like me comes to your website, that I can just push a button and listen to your entire catalog right there, and right then and there.
Hmm. Yeah, and that relates to a lot of other questions coming in around, how bands with no real connections to the network can, you know, kind of branch out more in today's environment, or what artists can be doing right now during a pandemic to continue building their audience. Shouts to Kristen and Will who ask questions like that. I think it ties into this idea here too of just making yourself as visible as possible and finding those new ways without shame, without embarrassment, without, putting yourself in that position, because it's not fair to yourself to feel embarrassment for seeking opportunities to find a second income right now because you can't go on the road and tour or you can't gig. There's no shame in that, and it's really important right now that those kind of funds are around and available for artists, as well as these online opportunities to continue to network and be creative, even if we can't do it on the road.
Yeah, and back in just to the beginning of that question is, I wouldn't necessarily worry about trying to grow your audience as much as talking to the audience that you currently have.
Mm-hmm.
Focus really on that, and from that it will grow.
Right. Yeah. Being able to focus on that audience and keep them engaged right now too, I think will allow you that momentum when it is time to get back to playing live shows and coming right back out the gate. Those fans, those people that have been following you through the pandemic, I feel like will be motivated and ready to go when it's time to buy tickets to that next show or check out that next album or whatever exciting things you have coming up when it is time to play shows again.
Yeah, just they're fans for life, and that's what I'm really striving for.
Getting those super fans. Great. Well, Juan, it's been such a pleasure getting to host you. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. Wanted to thank everybody who submitted questions. Appreciate everybody taking the time, and sorry we couldn't get to all of them today, but really enjoyed this conversation and hope everybody tuning in did as well. Juan, anything going on right now that you'd like to tell the people about before we wrap up, or we just trying to keep it one day at a time?
I feel like it's Groundhog Day a little bit, but I'm sure a lot of other people do. I just I just want people to stay safe, but most importantly, have fun and take the time to appreciate all that we have right now.
Beautifully said. Thank you, Juan, so much for joining us for In Session. We've got a really great In Session coming up next week, so check out the Sofar website for more information on the events that we have coming up. A lot of really great stuff scheduled just like this, but for now, again, my name is Billy Walsh, and I'm joined here by Juan Luis Carrera. Really appreciate your time, Juan, and I hope everybody has a great rest of their week.
Thank you.
All right, take care, everybody.